This is Kate, owner of 123 Limited and host of the Comfy Chairs. I am, as I've said before, obsessed with leading and learning. This is because I believe that helping others learn to lead with love and intention is essential to making work work. When we say leader, it can be easy to imagine an executive, the power suit, the corner office, the whole 9 yards. But there are more leaders in middle management than within the C-suite. This middle is what is essential to every aspect of work today. After all, Gallup's 2023 State of the Global Workplace report discovered that 70% of team engagement can be attributed to the team's manager. But let's take a look at some other numbers. Only 48% of managers strongly agree they have the skills and training needed to perform their jobs. Managers are 43% more likely to experience burnout. 46% of managers have stated they are likely to quit due to workplace stress. 57% of managers shared that they wish they had been warned before taking a manager job. I've invited today's guest not to discuss these statistics or to debate the current state of management, but to explore how we, coaches, leaders of leaders, and companies, can make positive change happen for the people who manage. Brian, welcome to the Comfy Chairs. Please tell us a little about yourself and the work that you're doing right now.
Well, thank you very much, Kate. So my name is Brian Welch. I'm the owner of Shift Focus Coaching and Consulting. And what I say is I help organizations develop their managers and build best-in-class management cultures. I'm a certified and trained executive coach. That's kind of the type of work I do is coaching, whether it's executive coaching or group coaching. I'm based in Anchorage, Alaska. I've been doing this work for a couple of years now. I left a IT consulting firm that I was with for about 25 years as I kind of went into my second half of life and kind of thought about what do I want to do for the rest of my life. I knew I wanted to be working with people and really kind of found this work of managers to be the most necessary and most rewarding. So that's really where I focus my work, is trying to support managers.
Even though we've come from different fields, I think we're probably in a very similar place where how do we support the leaders, the people managing who make the work possible? Because the work of managers is crazy challenging. It's always been difficult to be in middle management. In my 20 years, I haven't seen it get any easier. It just seems to be going the other way, where it's more difficult, more challenging. If I wanted to be doom and gloom, I could say we're in this horrible mess right now. And I think, despite that, there are a lot of opportunities. So, again, I'm looking forward to our conversation. I see that one of the dynamics at play for managers right now is what I've shorthanded as responsibility tension, where those middle managers, they're kind of playing the part of the rope in a game of tug of war. We see it playing out in attitudes and statements, as well as the surveys and data. I have heard leaders say in my time things like, well, if my leader or if the executive team isn't doing it, they're questioning why should I do it? Then on the other side, managers who are trying very hard to please everyone on their team and feeling like they're failures because they can't make that happen. I'd really like to understand your opinions on what you think's gotten us here, kind of what are the causes, but then more important, how people like myself and you with HR or learning and development experience and in that profession, how can we work to relieve or change the tension that managers are experiencing?
It's an interesting problem. And so the first way I always approach it, because it's the one thing that we can control, is what can I do, or what can the manager do? So this idea of personal responsibility or taking responsibility. And it's kind of a hard discussion to start with because you don't want to I mean, I don't in any way intend to blame the manager or to say it's your fault because they're already getting that, like you said,
Hmm.
from both levels. But if you don't start there, you're never going to get out of that tug of war. And so, start by taking responsibility. And if you can do that, you actually might start feeling like I'm not the rope, and maybe I don't want to play the game tug of war. I want to play chess or something.
Yeah.
Um, so, that's like that concept of taking responsibility can be expressed in a lot of different ways, whether it's the career, whether it's for your people, whether it's for, how you want to show up, all those things. But as soon as you do that, then you get out of that game of, well, they, us and them. Um, so that's like the core thing. I would say like that's pretty fundamental to like what I try to do and teach and help people is reclaiming that autonomy for themselves within their domain. I think one of the big causes, like when you get more to your question of like what's one of the causes, I do think ambiguity is like one of the biggest causes that managers go into a role, they don't really understand what is success. What is success for me? What is success for my team? What results am I responsible for? How do I prioritize those results? Is it retention? Is it efficiency? Is it growth? Is it output? Is it profit? Is it customer satisfaction? What is the priority for me as a manager? When should I be insecure and when should I feel good? Um, and so, it gets manifested, I think, a lot of times it's like we need more training and we need to get more training. And and
Yeah.
and that's not, that's not true or not wrong, but that's not the problem. I
Hmm.
think the lack of clarity is the problem.
I I want to stand up and applaud, Brian. I want to give you an ovation. I have been saying for years that I think the foundational leadership skill, and this is 10 times even more true for leaders of leaders, is clarity. That it's, clarity of purpose, of communication, of expectations. And it all comes down to that: do people really understand what's expected of them? And you can't assume. We always assume, well, they're a manager. It would be insulting. They're a professional. They've got this experience. No, they have to be told. It doesn't mean you tell them like they're small children, but people need to be told the like he talked about what does success look like. That just feels to me like the bare minimum that new leaders should be exposed to.
And they need to be, I understand what you mean. They need to be told, sounds, so
Hmm.
elementary, but that needs to be communicated over and over because the pressures are changing, the situation's changing, and managers are dealing with a lot of different things.
Hmm.
So when they go and say, I don't know what to focus on, that leader, like you said, the leader of leaders may be saying the same thing, should be saying the same thing over and over, but that's what they have to do.
Yeah.
It takes repetition to keep providing that clarity.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to possibly get us on a tangent that's too far off track, but one of the things that I have said in training to managers is you should be tired of hearing yourself say the same things over and over when it comes to setting expectations. You should be sick of your own voice when it comes to this, and that tells you that you're kind of just on the right track because consistency is, again, foundational to trust. And all of this is about that trusting relationship between the manager and their people.
Yeah, I think that's a good
Yeah.
way to frame it, is you should be tired of hearing about it. And it feels foreign. You're like,
Hmm.
oh, am I talking down to them? What are they going to feel like I'm repeating myself?
Yeah.
It's not the case.
What type of relationship have you built? If they understand that you're being consistent, that you're giving the level of detail that you have said, this is what I need as the employee, then no, you're not talking down to them because you've negotiated that. And I think we have not taught leaders, managers, to ask their people what they want. And that is, I think, part of what results in this sense of I can't please everyone, I can't get it all done, I don't have any authority or power, because not only are they working in this murky space where they don't know what does it look like for me to succeed, they don't know what their people want from them either, because they don't know how to ask. You used the term just a moment ago, Brian, reclaiming authority. Love that. I'd like to have you expand on that a little bit. Not just kind of what you mean by it for the manager, but as an executive coach, a leadership coach, how you guide that process as well.
So if you think about a person moving from an individual contributor role to a manager role, the very typical pattern is you've gone from an individual contributor where you've had a pretty structured, this is how you progress, from junior to senior to top level. Now you're moving into management and things have been well mapped out. And then you get into management and it's not well mapped out. But you're used to looking to other people. And a lot of people didn't do that early on, like when they were deciding what they wanted to do. And so there is a bit of a reclaiming of you are starting to have more authority or ability to influence your career where you want to go. And that takes a little bit of work and examination to say, I'm now leading myself. When you move into management, you've got more responsibility, which means you have more authority, especially for yourself. It is so easy for all of us to just start looking externally and to say, well, I don't know what they want. You just hear those things come up really easily, and we all do it. And so that's what I love about coaching, because then you work through that, and they change that to, what do I want to do? How do I want to approach this? What outcome am I looking for? And all of a sudden you just see it change, from frustration and helplessness to I can do something and I've got control and I've got power, and nothing else externally has changed. Yeah. We've been just talking in 1 hour, there's nothing outside has changed. They're approaching it with a much different attitude. That's what's beautiful about coaching, is you give people that space to articulate and say these things out loud, and then hear it and then think, how can I think about it differently?
You said, I don't know what they want. The they that gets tossed around a lot in management. It's important for us to go after that, I think, not viciously, but to question, because you're giving your autonomy, your authority to someone else when you say they, whether that's HR or your boss or quote unquote corporate. It comes to this question of empowerment. And we know, anecdotally, and the research is showing us that, again, managers feel like they're lacking empowerment. I think that the issue really starts with understanding the source of empowerment. And you started to tease that a little bit in talking about how you do some of those coaching engagements. But I think we have to ask ourselves, do I need to be empowered externally, or do I empower myself? Do I make choices where I recognize my span, my scope, and I claim my power, if you will? I think we could argue for both, either or both. But ultimately, it's the context of the workplace and that individual and how they interact and view themselves within that workplace context. I'd like us to spend a little bit more time on this and to discuss some practical steps back and forth that we think managers who don't feel empowered, that they can be able to take.
Well, yes, I 100% agree with you. Empowerment it's a little paradoxical, right? Because as soon as I say, well, I'm going to empower you, that means I've given you this power, and now I also can take it away, which by that's disempowering, right? To have so if you just think about the circle of control, circle of influence, and you work through that with somebody, and so maybe ask them at the start, how empowered do you feel, and then just go through the situation thinking about what's in your control. What's not in your control? What do you have influence on? What do you want to be in your control? What can you do to move that from influence to control? What do you things that are you can't move to control that you have only have influence in? What how do you want to interact with them now that you know you can only influence them? And you go through all that and talk through that, and then give them the same question. How empowered do you feel? And I will feel more empowered. I'll feel more in control. Through that, they become empowered, but it's only if they look back and recognize that.
I have this very clear memory. I was teaching a class of middle managers, a course on fostering growth. So we were talking about professional, personal development, kind of how that isn't just about you, it's also your people, and the inevitable question of like, well, we don't see other leaders doing this. We don't see our bosses or their bosses doing these things. And I stopped the class. Let's talk about whether you're doing things because you see other leaders doing it or because it's the right way to do the job. You have your job responsibilities, the job description, the roles that you play and fill that gives you your fence posts. That is your space of authority. Now, what are you doing with it? And as a manager, how are you also bringing your understanding of this is the right way to lead, to manage my people, totally independent from what you see happening around you. And I don't fault particularly younger managers for that because being different can be scary. And it is vital, I think, for managers to recognize that they have their mandate, they have their authority from the job itself, and then also a compass of what they know to be right and how people want and need to be treated in the workplace. And if you're going to choose a leadership role, because it is a choice, right? Then you've made the choice to do those hard things. Obviously, they need support, they need resources. It's much more complex when you're on the line with your people. I have a bit of a soapbox I get on about the I don't see other people doing it. And yeah. I like the locus of control, the spheres of control and influence as a way to reframe that mindset. Because even if I can't control the environment, I can control myself in the way I respond to it. And I think we, as coaches, can come alongside and help people in that process.
Yeah, move into that. The other kind of component of that is similar to what you were saying about, hey, other people aren't doing it. Why should I do it? I think Simon Sinek, I'm sure others have said it, but
yeah.
be the manager you wish you had. And I think it's very easy for managers to get really focused on doing the work and getting the work done and getting their people efficient and not stop and think, what kind of manager did I want? How did I want to feel about my manager? And what kind of relationship did I want? And be that independent of anything happening above. You're answerable to your conscience, your
Mm-hmm.
whatever moral system you have. And so, taking some time to think about that and say, what kind of manager did I want? And am I being that kind of manager to the people I manage?
Yeah. I think there's a corollary to that, Brian. Managers also need to be the type of employee they wish they have. That their relationship with their one-up should reflect the way they expect their employees to treat them. Respect, asking for what they need, um, asking for specific feedback so that you can get your house in order and use that as your tool for managing. That makes sense.
Yeah. Well, it does. And to your point about the they
Mm-hmm.
statement, that's one of the things a manager can do is think about their boss, think about them going home at night, think about their personal life. Just make sure you don't, what do you call it, depersonify
Yeah.
them. But think of them as a person. They have the same insecurities about their leadership and about their, how they're doing things. And so, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Be the kind of employee you want your employees to be, and things will
Yeah.
be better.
It's kind of it's turtles all the way down or all the way up, right? And
Yeah.
for the middle, they've got to do both. I've got to be the employee I want. I also need to be the manager I want. Um, and it's part of the reason it's such a stressful role to hold. But also, in some ways, it's because you're being guided by this is what I think would be best, then you have this easy compass. And obviously, we're assuming that we're dealing with, moral, ethical, um, psychologically healthy people.
Yeah,
Neither
right.
of us is naive to think that there aren't people in leadership or manager roles who are wildly flawed and who mean bad intent for people. But today we're talking about the good eggs who may be struggling.
People that want to do better.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. And who want better for their people and for their bosses and for their companies. And in my experience, I don't know about you, but 99.999% of managers that I've worked with are just that. They're people who want to do better, but they don't always know how. And that's, I think, really the work that we have to focus on right now is here's how.
Yeah.
Speaking of the how, you've designed and written some approaches for self development. I'd like to give you a chance to kind of give you the stage to walk us through your spiral development matrix, focusing on those 3 P's of progression that you outlined. And this is one of the articles that you shared with me, and I'll be posting that so other folks can read it. And one of the things that I loved about the models and the direction that you gave in those articles is that it's not a self-contained process. There is also kind of a call to action that you hand that off to your employees once you've done it. So, like I said, I want to give you the stage to walk us through that and
Cool.
teach me.
I appreciate that, and I'm very enthusiastic about it. So if I get a little carried away or you need to clarify something, feel free to interject. I used to work in consulting. I used to do a lot of work with college campus recruiting, and I'd go in and
Mm-hmm.
talk to students, and I'd tell them, I'd tell all the campus students, as you're moving into professional career, you want to be at your first job for 3 years. It's because you got a year to figure out what you need to do in the job, a year to get good at it, and a year to do something to really get you ready to be promoted. Well, managers, what I see is when they move into management, because they have that title, it puts a lot of kind of unrealistic realistic expectations from their employees, from their peers, maybe their boss, and especially themselves. So the 3 P's is really meant to give, like, the most important thing I think is it gives some language as to what's reasonable expectations as you progress in that role, not not career progression, but just within a role. So the 3 P's, or the first P is the practice stage, which is where you are just understanding, what do I need to do this job? What does this role encompass? And then the perform stage is where you get good at that role, where you master really being manager. And then the third P is the pioneer stage,
Mm-hmm.
which is where you do something unique or special or make your mark. And when I call it spiral development because the if you've seen the graphic of here's what success looks like, And
Yeah.
here's what it really is, so it's a straight arrow. It looks like a straight arrow, but really it's a this squiggly mess, and then you end up
So
higher up
squiggly.
the chart. Yeah, very squiggly. So progressing in your role as a manager is very much the same thing. Like you keep doing these actions around and around, and as you do, you progress or you move up. And so I have four domains. I think I called them something a little different in the article, but I call them risers. And it's just an acronym to help remember what they are. But the first domain is relationships or influence.
Hmm.
So at a certain stage, what relationships do you need to have? Then the second domain is skills or experiences. What skills? So for a new manager, the relationships they would need a relationship with their employees and a relationship with their manager at the practice stage. They might need time management and communication skills. And then the third domain is results. What results are you responsible for? And that may change based on different stages. At the practice stage, it might be just like you got to go through the activities. You got to do your one-on-ones. You got to, do your performance reviews. But then as they move into the perform stage, then it might be, now you're responsible for retention and or engagement. And then the last domain is systems. So what systems do you need to do your job? Like an HR system or a payroll
Hmm.
system. As somebody progresses up, they may, that will also include systems like your own personal systems, like a personal productivity system or systems of like people and processes and understanding kind of the bigger picture and what the levers are that are being at play. So the nice thing is, first of all, now you have a language. So when somebody becomes a new manager, everybody can understand they're at the practice stage. And
Yes.
that's really important for the manager to understand like this, I'm learning. I might make some mistakes. I don't know. It's okay to ask for help. The boss knows like they're going to need some extra support. The employees know they don't they don't know it all just because they have a manager title. They're learning. They're trying to be a good manager. We're going to help support them. So hopefully everybody's a little more gracious, a little more supportive. Then as you move into the perform stage, what happens a lot of times is that's where it kind of stops because the
Mm.
manager's doing a really good job. They're happy, they're feeling good. The the boss and the company is happy because this person's taking care of their business and taking care of things and it's running well. And so everybody kind of says, no harm, no foul, it's good until the manager starts getting a little bit bored and it's like, oh, maybe I do want to do something different. And then they start looking at a job ad, and then they, interview or they talk to a friend, and pretty soon they've got a job offer, and they're gone, and they've left this big hole because they were a
Hmm.
very competent manager, and you've lost all this potential for them to do something special.
Yeah.
So having that language and that understanding, there's another stage. You can really, now that you've proven yourself, you can really take this out and do something with it if you want, and we want to support that.
Not only do I love a good alliterative framework, repeat all the P's, um, I also I think you have made this logical path for people that one acknowledges the fact that you can't be expert when you first start. Nursing has what they refer to as the novice to expert model, that everybody starts at novice when they first begin a job. I love that you've got perform as sort of the linchpin, if you will, that getting to the point of performance is the goal. And then if your ambition, your circumstances, your engagement, all the things that can drive people to want advancement and not even necessarily promotion, but even expansion of roles or special assignments, as you said, you've given us pioneer as well. And it makes me think of trailblazing, that there's a path for people to follow. And what could be the final point of it is blazing a new trail. My guess is, though, because spiral, if I pioneer, I'm probably going to end up back at practice.
Well, I think that's a great conversation for the boss and the manager to have, because some people really don't want to go back. They don't want to go back to being freshmen.
Hmm.
They don't like that process. You know, I came from consulting, and we definitely had people that didn't like a lot of change, and consulting was a little bit challenging. Like they
Yeah.
didn't love the, you know, everything's different every time you go into a new client. And I would see managers like that too, where, you know, they're pretty happy being highly competent, but you still want to give them the opportunity to make their mark, and to show them like there's opportunities, not necessarily, again, it doesn't have to be an up or out. If they are looking to get promoted, then that pioneer stage should be something to help propel them. But it also might be they become the person that's really helping to continue to drive the organization
Hmm.
forward, and they're the, you know, they're just like the rock solid person. But it's an open conversation.
Yeah. Making that clear connection to the talent management and the succession planning piece, super smart. Because not only is this progression what people crave at work, it's also the progression that businesses need. It makes a business case for how you're developing your people. I'd like to hear a little bit more about the risers as well. Um, probably the question I have about it is, what are ways that you can go about identifying what risers you need?
Yeah. So in most cases, the manager's going to be, this is a tool that the manager adopts and says, okay, like you said, it's personal development. I'm going to start doing this for myself. And they would go in and kind of fill out, here's what I think I need. So, you know, the attributes for each of those domains in the practice stage. And maybe the perform stage, I'd start fleshing that out a little bit. What's great then is they can take that provides some context for a really good discussion with your boss, or really ongoing discussions. Here's where I think I am. Here's what the things I think I need to do to progress to this stage. What do you think? And I describe the matrix. So if hopefully if I've done an okay job, you have like this visual of the three P's on the left,
Mm-hmm.
you know, the domains and this matrix. I describe that as like the map for this role. And then the employee gets to make, the manager gets to make their development plan. They get to say, this is what I'm working on. I want to work on my relationship with my employees. And that's what I'm really focused on. Or I'm gonna, you know, whatever it is for each of those domains, or each of those risers. And I kind of say, you know, just pick one. Just pick
Yes.
one goal, work on that, and then when you get that done, then work on another. And that's the idea of spiral. You know, you just keep
Mm-hmm.
spiraling through those. But then it's manageable, it's tangible, and I think most important to me, it's self-directed.
Yeah.
That's what they want.
Yeah.
Um, so for the manager, it's going to be kind of progressive. You know, it's going to kind of evolve as they move into it and continue to
Mm-hmm.
flesh it out. Once they go through it, though, now that matrix can continue to get revised and improved upon as subsequent managers come behind them. And then you asked about the employees. If managers, you know, and it's funny, I think nurses do this, like the um, the nurses do, like learn one, do one, teach one.
Correct.
So it's like you're learning about it, you do it for yourself. Now you can go back and you should be able to flesh that out pretty well for your employees,
Yeah.
to say, here's your map for your job, for your role. And you have the progression and the thing. But then you give it to the employee to say, now you create your development plan. What goals do you want to work on? I'm going to support you in that.
Mm-hmm.
And then we can have good discussions about, if you think you're at the perform stage and I think you're at the practice stage for skills and experience, let's get you the right skills, or
Yeah.
let's get you the right experiences.
One of the things I'm really liking about this model, Brian, is it's kind of self-scalable. That the practice, perform, pioneer there's the what stage am I at for this job, but also how am I working through the development of a particular skill or capability as well. So if you said building relationships with my employees is the skill I've identified because I'm in the practice stage of my role, then all right, how am I going to practice doing this? What are the steps I'll take to practice having relationships, that are more productive, effective, and make them feel recognized and appreciated? Well, maybe I will round. Maybe I'll, schedule more frequent one-on-ones that I'm having with them, whatever that is. You practice it, and then you identify what does actual performance look like in this space. That's you work on that. You're in that space so that you can show you can get a result. And then once you've got it down pat, how can I play with this? How can I make it more, better? Maybe teach it to my colleagues, something like that. So even the skill itself goes through that. I'm figuring it out. I'm a novice. I know nothing. To I'm actually able to innovate and create new things to pioneer in that space. Yeah, it's a wonderful self-driven framework for people because not only does it, let's look at where you are in the job as well as where you want to go. This is the next desired step. Then also it has within itself the guideline for how to grow.
Yeah, well, thank you for validating it. Just as we were talking, kind of reflecting back on our earlier conversation, it also provides that ability to look backwards
Mm-hmm.
and gain some of that, that empowering reflection to say like, oh yeah, look at where I started. I was doing the basics of,
Yes.
of this, and now I've got this highly engaged team that can communicate well. I've done a lot in this role and
Yeah.
really feel good and feel like they've got competency.
The more I encounter it, Brian, from that first introduction you gave to me, I'm liking it more and more to the point where I'm kind of jealous. Yeah. Now,
Well, good.
what about the folks that are like, well, I've practiced, now I should pioneer? How do we help them not skip straight over into the I'm now ready. I practiced it. I can do it all. I can go to the next thing. Because I think having performance as the center point is vital to it.
Yeah, I think that some people will want to jump that. I think more common people are going to be at the perform stage. So like when I talk about people being ready to move into pioneer, they are they're not working, weekends and evenings to get their job done. They've got margin and they've got space. They've got delegation down, and so they're comfortable in letting other people do the work so they can handle some of the ups and downs that come in a manager role. They can handle a lot of different scenarios being thrown at them. That's how those are some of the characteristics of somebody that's really kind of ready for the pioneer stage.
Mm-hmm.
So I think what is more common is people being kind of in the middle of perform, thinking they're ready for pioneer stage when they haven't really mastered the role. And again, that's another kind of like challenge of managers is, it is scary to start fully stepping into management because they're often balancing like some individual contributor roles, some management, and
Yeah.
they don't know what's next. And they're leaving what they've built their reputation on and their competency and their security, their financial security,
Mm-hmm.
stepping in all the way into management. So they're reticent to let things go and stop doing so much work.
Yeah.
And so that that you have to have those discussions, and at some point you got to trust. But if you can paint the picture, you say, oh yeah, trust me because I've done that and it didn't go like exactly like I thought, right? But if you can start saying like, here, we got to get you to not have so much responsibility, we have to give you some space, because we want to go here. And if you want to move to the next position, you need to do a visible project. You need to take on
Yeah.
some initiative that kind of moves the company. And now you've given them something that they can say, okay, I have a little bit more tangible thing I can put my trust in.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, and it ties back to one of our problems for managers these days is ambiguity, that there's lack of role clarity. And if we think that that isn't going to trickle down to frontline staff, we're not paying attention.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it goes up and down. What I do like about self development, if you're doing it in a fashion where you're confirming with your one up, it brings more clarity to your role as well. If for some reason you don't have that coming naturally and kind of quote unquote properly from your leader, what a manager can do is pose the question, if you will, by taking a development plan and asking, does this line up with what you think of my role, what you think of my current performance, and of my strengths and development needs? It becomes a tool, and because you've got this very clear idea of practice, what I'm not great at yet, or what I'm still learning. Let me put it that way instead of not great at. What I am still learning, where I'm performing, and where I'd like to begin exploring, it can help guide that conversation. Is what you're asking for is your manager's opinion about things. And let's be honest, managers love to share opinions.
Yeah. Well, and to your point earlier, that's the job they've stepped into as well for their employees, right? Is
Yeah.
they're leading them. They've turned over some part of their career to your hands,
Hmm.
and you get that responsibility and that privilege.
What I like about having a discussion about self development, that we're talking about personal responsibility. And to be clear, I firmly believe that employers have a responsibility to their employees to provide for professional development. And I've made a career of it myself. And you cannot wait for your boss or your company to hand you a plan, to take you by the hand and walk you through something. Particularly if you've chosen a leadership position or you're interested in going into leadership or management. And I know I'm using those terms kind of very mushily, which some people will have an objection to, but for the sake of today's conversation, I'd like to be granted some grace there.
Yeah, I'm comfortable with it.
Because I can just imagine some people saying self development, well, isn't it my company's job to offer that to me? Yes. And it's also yours. And if you're waiting for it to happen, well, it's probably not going to come.
At some point, it will run out. Like at
Mm-hmm.
some point, they won't be able to offer you what you need, and then what? So
Yeah.
yeah, I'd argue like start it as soon as you can, because the better you are at it, the more fulfilling your career will be.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, by no means, I'm 100% with you. By no means does advocating for self-development exonerate the organization's responsibility from investing in their employees and
Yeah.
providing opportunities.
Well, it comes back to that, not only be the manager you want, but be the employee you want. So you want your employees to be eager and involved and growing. And it may not look like a development plan, which is okay. And if that's what you want from them, you need to model it for them. And that also means if you want your manager to be doing this for you, even if it's not happening for whatever reason, you still need to behave that way toward your people. And we can't ask employees to do things we're not willing to do ourselves. What it comes down to is a core responsibility of managers. It's not necessarily the thing that's going to solve all of the world's problems, but if people that choose management aren't going to claim their personal professional development as one of those management responsibilities, we're not going to see improvements in the workplace.
In my methodology, that's actually the first thing we start with is, what's in it for you? What are you looking for? They call it the manager mindset,
Yeah.
because it really is, you have to change that if you're going to go very far at all.
I talk about this as your leadership story, probably a very similar thing. But back in the day when I would be a new manager orientation presenter, that's one of the things that I would talk to them about. I say that one of the things that you want to do from the beginning is be able to answer for yourself, why am I leading and what type of leader do I want to be? And be prepared to talk about it. But that mindset is so important.
How did people respond to that?
Very positively. The new leaders that we continued to be able to support through that program, we could see a difference in their engagement as an employee and also what their teams looked like.
Yeah.
It's something now that I'm doing my own thing. It's on my long list of tools I'd like to develop of here's how to tell your management story, your leadership story, just to give people a resource for that.
Yeah, I mean, there's all these like barriers to us calling ourselves leaders, and one of the ways that you start overcoming that is just like you did with your group is start small. Like what have you led? What are you a leader of? Talk about yourself as a leader in your story, and that's how you start taking on the role of leadership, which is really is a necessary thing in our world. I mean, we need more leaders.
We do. A lot of what you do in coaching and development is sort of sneaky, right? So, like, the sneaky fact is we want everybody to have leadership capacity and capability. Do you see yourself as a leader? Do you understand how your role and your job responsibilities have a direct impact on what your organization's trying to do? Because that's leadership. We could go through the semantics of you have to have followers to be a leader, but you can also lead yourself.
Yep.
Something that you wrote about, I'm changing subjects a little bit, something that you wrote about that I really enjoyed is just the idea of experimentation. You talk about it as a way to do the work. It's also a way to practice your self-development. And I'd like us to spend a little time on that topic because I think it's buckets of fun and interesting and also really accessible.
Yeah, I love the concept of experimentation. I mean, there's a few things, and like in relation to managers, I think managers, like, they either become the floor or the ceiling. They're kind of become the barrier as opposed to like the facilitator. When I was a manager, I said no a lot. Like, people would come to me with ideas and I'd say nope, nope, nope. And it wasn't because I thought they were bad ideas or I didn't want them to succeed. I just had all these worries in my head. I had worries about, like, how much money is it going to cost? How much am I going to have to get involved? What if it doesn't go well? How's that going to look? How's it going to look for the employee? And I had a bunch of other things I was thinking about, so it was just easy to say no. And that it didn't help me. It didn't help the employees. It didn't help the company. So, so the idea of experiments is like, well, let's try to fix it, but let's, understandably, the organization needs to control how many resources and what we give to it. And if we're going to invest a little bit, let's make sure we learn, which that's what I love about experiments is there's really no failed. I mean, there's failed experiments, but there's really no, you don't fail if you learn something.
Yep.
And you want to improve the quality of learning, but it started with like thinking about from a bottom up, how do managers facilitate getting those ideas from their employees and people that are really doing the work and make it accessible.
Well, one of the reasons I love it as a concept in the workplace is acknowledging the fact that many experiments fail. And by making experimentation part of your practice of how you lead and how your team gets involved in decision making, because you know that failure will sometimes be inevitable, you're saying it's okay to not always get it right, which can directly impact the quality of psychological safety on a team. So it is it's a simple way to be weaving in how we want to be healthy and kind and better together. I also, and this is definitely my bias, I think it's a way to introduce play into the workplace. I've been I've been thinking about this a lot recently. One of the things that we, people that are concerned with how people do work, should really put some time and attention to is playfulness at work. Not silliness, not carelessness, but having that sort of lighter joy that's appropriate for the environment. But experiments allow for imagination, and imagination is fundamental to play.
I like that because when I think about experiments, I wouldn't have said play. I think it would be fun to be part of a culture where they're constantly doing experiments, right? Even just small ones. Like, hey, we're trying, you know, only 25-minute meetings this month. Whatever.
Yeah.
Like you just do little experiments. When you call them an experiment, like you said, it provides the ability to fail or the permission to fail, which improves psychological safety. It also like reduces everybody's resistance,
Yes.
no matter where their bias is. But if we're just going to do an experiment, then it's like, okay, fine, I'll see how it goes,
Yeah.
right? And we're not arguing about is it the right or wrong thing to do. Now we can just take our own insights from the results after the
Hmm.
experiment. So it just kind of like lowers the threshold for everybody's willingness to engage.
I agree. And it starts to build muscle in terms of um, imagination, innovation. There are just so many benefits to it. It's one of the ways that managers can kind of claim some autonomy and power for themselves is to identify this is where I have the playground or the lab to run this experiment. I can't imagine that we wouldn't also see improvement in critical thinking and problem solving and all the things that we need now, but we're going to need even more in the years to come.
Right. What a framework does is it provides a little bit of structure and a little bit of rigor.
Yeah, why don't you run us through that framework really quickly? I know it'll end up being pretty high level, but if nothing else, it's just fun.
So the framework is called the Starshot framework. And the really quick, it's scope. What a high level, what are you going to do? We want to improve meetings. Timeline. How long are you going to run the experiment for? What's your ambition with it? So what's important about it to you? Like,
Hmm.
and how is it going to help others? Like, what's the grander ambition? What are the requirements? So what do you need to run the experiment? Who's on the team? What are the resources that are going to be needed? Then setup. So that's STAR, setup. What are you going to have to do? Who are the stakeholders? And then hypothesis. So
Hmm.
what are you really testing and how are you going to test it? Are you going to do A/B tests or prototypes
Yeah.
or uh, whatever? And what are the parameters and constraints? And then O is the operation. Do the experiment, collect the data, make sure you have checkpoints along the way. Sometimes these experiments, you do them, and if they work, sometimes they just kind of slide into the common operating, right? As opposed
Yeah.
to like a really concrete, like, hey, we did this and let's capture this, and now what do we want to codify? So that's part of that operation. And then most important point probably is takeaways.
Yeah.
What are you going to take away from this? What do you learn? Were the results what you expected? Who was impacted? Who needs to know about the results? That provides you the rigor to say, all right, we can run this experiment. And um, in
Yeah.
my ideal culture, anybody could put one of those together and work with their manager. If I had had this when I was a manager, it would have changed how I interact with people and people interacted with me when they brought ideas.
There are some types of work that naturally lend themselves to thinking about how are we tinkering with this, toying with it, but that's not always the case for every type of team or job. So being able to say, here's a clear way to do it that isn't overcomplicated, that's pretty straightforward and also pretty intuitive at the end of the day, we can't go wrong. And if I tie it back to thinking about things that managers need, having simple tools like that and having the different ways to get results is really important.
Yeah, if you think about the rate of change and
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it gives them some control back. I think just kind of piggybacking on that, we didn't talk much about it, but you asked earlier what HR could do to support managers and how to do that. And I see a lot of times HR looks at or organizational development looks at solutions to for the whole company.
Uh-huh.
And as I've gotten into coaching more and thought about this and just what I advocate for, I would to advocate more for investing more in the humans than the technology. So as an example, if you compare two options, one option is I bring in communication training for my 500 employees. That sounds good. But if I go and spend that same amount of money, but train my 5 top managers and give them the coaching to become awesome communicators and be able to articulate why they're good communicators, they can model that, they can coach others on it. It's a little counterintuitive when you compare those two options, but you still like I think investing in people is always going to be the bigger payoff in the long run.
Yeah, you have you've pushed one of my buttons here. The problems we have in training and development. One of the reasons we get these blanket fix my people issues is we don't do a good job of actually measuring the impact of training and development. So you get these scattershot approaches that don't serve us. Oh, it seems like I have this better ROI because 500 people instead of 70.
Yeah.
Well, no, you've actually thrown more money down the drain because you can't connect that to specific needs and performance gaps because there's pressure to do what's asked of you within those training and development departments because so many of them are working on a shoestring budget with the fear of cuts always looming over them. So they're going to be order takers instead of strategic partners. So that's one soapbox. The other is that we need to be moving actively and constantly toward as much individualized learning as we can at the point of work. Let us develop you to be a great learner who has significantly solid, strong, and effective critical thinking skills. That if that's how we bring people into the workforce, when they encounter problems, the workforce can then bubble up. We need discrete skill training that can be targeted and addressed as needed. I'd like us to think about what are the big ideas, the key takeaways that we each have. I've got a couple of big keywords that are looming large for me. I'd love to hear yours, Brian.
I think the first one was really the discussion on empowerment. I think that word, I mean, I use that word in my tagline, and I really appreciated how much we circled around it and kind of looked at it from all these different facets, how important it is, but how tricky it is, and what it really means. So that's the big idea. I think what I take away from that is it's really important not to be careless with that word because, like I said, and really drove home with this conversation is when you empower somebody, that means you can take it back, and that's disempowering. So there's this paradox, and we need to be clear about what we're really after, and that's something I'm going to go away and think more about.
It's funny. I'm going to reference my tagline too. Leading is hard work. Let's make it easy. I think the way that we make it easy is by boiling down to the essentials of leadership. And the big word for me, we kind of kept coming back to was responsibility. You have a responsibility to others, but as a leader, you also have a responsibility to yourself. And if I can think about how am I responsible and loving to myself, others, and the work, a lot of what makes leading difficult starts to fall away because it's extra, it's noise that we've tacked on. My takeaway is to think about how can responsibility become a lens and a bridge toward management being as easy as possible.
I like that.
So, Brian, I'd love to talk about what you've got going on right now. If you have any publications, training, anything else on the horizon, please tell us more about that.
Well, I do a column in our local business magazine. It's called Alaska Business. So I think you said you were going to link up a couple of those previous
Yes.
articles. I have one coming out in May about delegation. And then I'm also in the process of putting together a webinar that I'm going to make free to people just to help them kind of take that next step in terms of a lot of what we've talked about. Management mindset, getting that mindset of leading yourself, and then applying the spiral development matrix. So those are in the works.
I look forward to seeing how that goes, Brian. Thank you so much for this conversation. I've enjoyed it a lot. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. I was very excited for this, and it did not disappoint in any way. So I'm really excited about the conversation we had.
I will do my happy dance when we're done. It's great to hear. Thank you. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to support the podcast, please subscribe, leave a rating or review, or share it with others. You'll find Comfy Chairs updates and other thoughts on leadership and learning on Instagram at 123 Limited. That's ONE23 LTD.